Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is about an intro to Genesis. I'm going to try to get to Genesis 10 or 11 to help you understand why I'm right about the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. I'm right about Nimrod. I'm right about the Garden of Eden. I'm right about romance and God's plan and the sun being the greater light to govern the day and so on and so forth. So this is the intro. Okay, first of all, we see wordplay with the Garden of Eden, with the phrase, the Garden of Eden. You get guard in alpha from garden. And of, you get AF, right? Alpha, F. You get foe, and you get phi. And Eden, you get alpha, dawn. And add in, and so on and so forth. So what they're saying is something that's stupid and pointless, okay? Something that's retarded, something that's evil, something that's very sinister. It's a sort of devious, racist, rich Jews, and devious and diabolical rich whites, and token minorities, and these psychotic LGBT people who, you know, some of them rape children. I'm not saying that every white Jew or minority or LGBT person, but these people who govern society, these neo-colonists, they have a crazy agenda for the world. Think about porn and all the weird porn out there. Think about, you know, the Disney occult. Think about the banking sector and all the lunacy associated with it, all the greed. Think about, you know, Hollywood and corporations and the sexual harassment. And think about all the abuse and all the people starving all over the world and how the wealthiest country in the world and other developed nations won't help them out. So you know I'm right by the fruit of the world matching my explanation for what's going on, where other people are in a sort of trance-like state and they don't understand. So who is the guard in the Garden of Eden? Right, it goes back to the cherubim. And one word for Horus, you can look it up if you don't believe me, is Heru, aka Haru or Har. These are words for Horus. And so with the cherubim that's guarding the Garden of Eden, which we'll get to when we get to chapter 2, you see that there's wordplay there. It says C, Heru, B-I-M, right? Bisexual. Bi is in goodbye, magic. So the people who wrote the story, right, it's by Bel. It's not by God, it's not by Horus, it's by Bel. And we'll see that when we see the pattern of wordplay, right? The Garden of Eden, the cherubim. Okay, how God created the world and why. The fact that it's a coded message. And we'll connect it, if we have time, to what is said to be the actual location that correlates to the spiritual location, which is said to be in northern Egypt. That's a bit more tricky here, because when we get to the 4 headwaters that are coming from the garden, we'll see that it talks about the Tigris and the Euphrates. It talks about Cush. Okay. It talks about the land of Havilah. We'll see that it talks about Asher. And these places aren't exactly associated with Egypt, but they are, because Cush founded Egypt. But when we're talking about the garden, we're talking about a very complex idea. It's superimposed on an idea that it's best said plainly and directly, and with words like the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. So the people who wrote the Bible, right? Bel, hell, spell, well, el, and so on and so forth, right? Rhyme and reason. They believe in embracing the disgrace in the name of their race and sub-race and sub-races. They don't believe in making it so people go to heaven. They believe in putting on a show because they worship Dionysus, who's said to be a young Zeus, and an old Zeus is like an old alley cat or an old original gangster, an OG, or an old Freemason, somebody who knows the game and is maneuvering a certain way. So the young Zeus, Dionysus, from Dios, meaning father, meaning Zeus, in the Greco-Roman mythological context. has everything to do with the old Zeus and to do with Pan, who has similar rituals. And Pan means all for all the Greco-Roman deities, and Pan is the devil on the tarot card, and he has goat features, including legs. And we see in Matthew, I believe it's 25, that Christ as a character in the story separates the sheep from the goats. So we're going to get to this story here, and we're going to see how there's wordplay in Pishon right there. You see no ship right there. Gihon, right? Gihon, right? The martial art gi. And there's other wordplay because the vowels are interchangeable, like in Cush. There's a play on words for hawks. Okay, and hacks. And they're trying to hack my brain, but there's other applications, like they hacked off limbs of people. But when you really look at this thing here, you see that life is a struggle. Long ago, the average age, the average lifespan was like 30 years old or something. People were dying all the time anyway. And a recurring theme was that a short, righteous life was greater in this world and the next than a long, wicked life. And people whose brains don't quite function well, they didn't understand it to the point where they lived it, so they weren't living it. We're going to get to that in this video series here. And we're going to talk about how the cherubim, again, a play on words for Horus, right? And there's other things, say maybe, right? M-I-B can be M-A-B, maybe, right? See Horus, maybe. And see whore. Maybe you'll see a whore in your life in that sort of way, like dating them, right? Maybe she'll see it your way, right? There's a lot of wordplay there. How it connects to the greater life to govern the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. And we'll talk about how the Egyptians talked about the two eyes of Horus, right? The right eye of Horus, which is the sun, right? The greater eye, if you will, and the left eye of Horus, which is the moon. And how, people in the church, they really represent for the moon more than the sun, even though there's the Sunday stuff and so on and so forth. Okay, and the Sunday, right, we have the chocolate and the white, and a mulatto, black and white, and so on and so forth. And how there's a certain white glow in a lot of churches, and that has to do with them claiming to follow the lesser light that governs the night, because the Son of God is absent, and I'm the greater, my soul is the greater light, and God is in charge of both of them. But actually the churches are actually following Apep and Set the Jackal, and they're following the occult wordplay instead of following the Son of God. So when we look at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and we get to Genesis chapter 3, the fall, it'll be very interesting when you see how the cherubim has a flaming sword, right? And there's a snake in the garden. And snakes don't do very well with a flaming sword that's, spinning in circles, for example. Or the angels working the angles, right? The cherubim is said to be a type of angel, okay? And we'll see how the word Michael, right, is a play on words from Emeka, right, which is my name, and El, or the L can be a 1, right? And how Micah is also a play on words for, Emeka, right? Because you can add letters within reason, right? So Micah is like the words Michael. It's also like the word Michal, who's said to be a suitable helper, in a sense at least, for David. And Christ is said to be the root and offspring of David. And you have the Genesis, right? The genes is, and the genes of Isis. Why are they using Isis when Isis is a pagan deity? Because this book was written later on when the cult of Osiris and Isis were very famous. Okay, the Osirian mysteries. And you get Serapis, right? Their false image of Christ, one of the main ones. Zagreus, Serapis, what have you. Which is a play on words for Serapis. Osiris, Apis, and Hades mixed together. And we see the word Hades in the Bible. And we see that there's a resurrection, and Dionysus is also a deity of resurrection through theater arts and psychology and so on and so forth, and grapes and wine and harvest, rich people, ritual madness, what have you. And we see that Osiris is a deity of the vegetation. So when one looks at this, for them not to consider the pagan myths at the time is for them to not do their due diligence, because Bel and Asherah are in the Bible, because Dagon and Rephan are in the Bible, because Nebo is in the Bible, because Molech is in the Bible. So who are these deities? How do you understand a book if you claim to be the expert on the book, if you don't make some kind of effort to understand what they're getting at and to read between the lines and see who's telling the truth about it and who isn't and why? And to understand that the tree of life is greater than the tree of knowledge. For example, when we're talking about economics, you can learn all about shoes and cars and chips and food products and go on and understand the fluctuations in the stock market going up and down and what country's doing what all day, every day. But if you don't have a sound economy, if you don't focus on the staples, on the core ideas, on the essential services, on things like this, then you're a poor economist. Because you can always hire a bunch of people to and put them in different areas. Say you keep track of cars, you keep track of food, what have you. So the good economist focuses on the overall plan on what is important. And so it is with the good human being. They focus on what matters, right? The greatest commandment, the golden rule. Making righteousness and justice the measuring line and plume line, obeying the commands of God. The 10 commandments, not 10 zillion, 10. They focus on things that matter. And so we see the purity and the focus and the timing and the discipline and the wisdom and the righteousness and the sense and the insight and so on and so forth, the prudence. And we see how they come into play here. And the Garden of Eden is about where man fell out of step with God. He fell out of grace for things of the flesh like race. And you'll see that I proved my point to a T. That the Bible is figurative. It starts off figurative. The language of the Bible, just like the way Christ was saying he's as a character in the story that he was speaking in John 16:25, is figurative. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. That's how it starts. That's how the first couple verses start. The Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. What does that mean? It's a mystery. And when we get to verse, in this chapter or the next, where it talks about the streams, and another version says the mist. The mist is being used interchangeably, in a sense at least, with the streams, right? There's different explanations. And so what does it mean for when we get to Proverbs 20, or when we explore this chapter, and I'll talk about Proverbs 21, or maybe that's the next chapter, this chapter 1 or 2, where it talks about the streams. What does it mean for the king's heart, who's established the throne in righteousness, not a king of this world, not Charles or the king of Saudi Arabia? What does it mean for his heart to be in the hand of the Lord? And for it to be a stream of water that God channels to those who please Him. What does that mean? A stream of water. There's a mist over the water. It's a mystery in regards to who's the king and why and what's going on. That's why it's being said that way. So the language in Proverbs is similar to the language in the four Gospels of Christ, for example, and in Revelation, because Christ, as a character in the story, is speaking figuratively. And so it is when we get to Genesis 3, for example, where God curses the serpent. What is the serpent? What does it mean for the serpent to be cast down and to be the lowest of the animals? What does that mean? It's not something that's being said plainly and directly. It is figurative. So the language of the Bible itself is the same as the language of Christ as a character in the story, and it is figurative. So as soon as we get there, it's a matter of, well, who understands it and who doesn't? And in the second book of the Bible, Exodus, it makes it crystal clear who does and who doesn't. In Exodus 3:14 and in Exodus 15:3, where it says, where Moses asked God, well, why should the Israelites listen to me? Why should they believe that I interpret God's acts and God's will better than other people? And God said, say to the Israelites, I am who I am. Who I am has sent me to you. Who God is has sent me to you. Now, who is he? Right, Moses, he defended the Midianite woman. He killed the Egyptian. He split the Red Sea eventually. Who is he? Right, he's this great warrior. And we see that in Exodus 15:3. Where it says that the Lord is a warrior, the Lord is his name, where Moses is singing praises to God. So who interprets the Bible effectively? It's like Abraham, who led, soldiers into battle, right? It is a warrior. Abraham and Moses. Isaac and Jacob, not so much. They weren't, Jacob kind of was a very wishy-washy character. Moses more respectable. Abraham more respectable. Isaac kind of wishy-washy. So who really understands God, the root and offspring of David? It is a warrior. It takes a certain type of warrior, mind, body, soul, spirit, right? This martial warrior to understand it.